Welcome to How to Share, a podcast about sharing to the appropriate audience with the best tool at the right time and how to receive when others share. I'm Wynne Leon. In the 25 years I've spent as a technology consultant specializing in collaborative software, I've witnessed the organizational efficiency and of innovative possibilities when teams share well. But more often, I've seen individuals and groups struggle with the fundamentals of sharing. Being vulnerable, knowing how to listen, and understanding that it's in their best interest to share everything, from tools, space, experiences, wisdom, and more. We're told to share from an early age, but never taught how to. So I started digging into the why of sharing and how to do it better. In the Why We Share episode, I shared historian Yuval Noah Harari's take on why humans rule the planet. Because we can participate in a global exchange of ideas. In this episode, I'm delving into how to share our personal stories. I provide a few examples, talk about the distinction between what is secret and what is private, draw on the wisdom of Dr. Marissa Franco about why and when we overshare, and also discuss whether we should share personal stories in a professional setting. I'll start with example. On the first date that I went on after I was divorced about 13 years ago, I went out to coffee with a man named JC that I'd been set up with. I'll blame it on the nerves, but I couldn't wait to explain why I got divorced. It was like I felt the need to get it out on the table to clear the air, regardless of whether he needed to know or not. The topic weighed on me so much that I think I practically blurted it out right after talking about the weather. Something like, "Wasn't the weather awful today?" "Oh yes, reminds me of the day my business partner took me to lunch to tell me of my husband's infidelities, and that's why we got divorced." Okay, it probably wasn't that bad, but I'm pretty sure there wasn't a natural segue to the conversation. Looking back on it, I realized I wasn't evaluating whether or not the story needed to be told, or when the right time was to reveal it. Nonetheless, JC was a nice guy and didn't seem to judge my untimely sharing. We went out a few times before realizing it wasn't a match, and I don't think it was how I shared my story. Although that's revealed, I was still processing it in my head and my heart. So skipping forward to the present, when all that is old news, and I rarely tell the story of my divorce. And that sets up my second example of personal sharing gone wrong, when I don't tell enough. After my divorce, I dated several nice men, but then I realized that I had a time crunch to have a family since I was in my mid-40s. I didn't want to rush into a relationship just because of that, so I chose to have 2 kids on my own, using in vitro fertilization, and I figured the relationship piece would work out when the timing was right. But I'm busy raising 2 kids, and the choice to do it on my own was so long ago, I often forget to tell that story to people I meet. Not because it's a big deal, but because it's old news. When I meet new families, usually because my kids, or in the context of work, we start talking about life as it is. Before I know it, we've become friendly. It's only after some time I realize they're trying to figure out why I'm parenting solo, and they don't want to ask in case it's traumatic. At that point, it's awkward for me to figure out how to introduce the story because we're already friends. I'm not sensitive to answering any questions, but they won't ask, and it feels weird for me to bring it up out of the blue. Another example of a timing failure for sharing, but in the opposite direction. So, how do we share our personal stories? What are the guidelines that are helpful in a personal and professional context? The first is to distinguish between what's secret and private. In an article published in Psychology Today, Columbia Business School professor Michael Thuppian makes the distinction between what is secret versus what is private. He writes, "You can draw a line between secrecy and privacy by considering secrecy as an intention to hold specific information back, and privacy as a reflection of how much you broadcast personal information in general. People who are more private require closeness before they let you in. Yet those who are less private may be happy to disclose personal information, and not just to friends and family, but to coworkers, acquaintances, and even people they've just met." Teasing that out a bit in relation to sharing, we have two dimensions. Is the information secret, meaning that you don't want it to be known at all? And the second is the audience. Are you open to sharing the information with the right audience? If so, it indicates that it might be more private than secret. There's a whole topic to dig into about the secrets we keep. For the purposes of this episode, I'll just say that I've watched people spend a whole lot of time trying to manage files they want to keep secret. It takes a lot of energy to secure the information we don't want to share. The second dimension is privacy. In my two examples, why I got divorced and why I chose to have kids on my own, neither story is secret. The key is to discern the right time and context in which to share them. And that leads us to the discussion of vulnerability versus oversharing. Dr. Marissa Franco, professor of psychology at the University of Maryland, talks about the difference between vulnerability and oversharing. She says, "There's research that finds that just having people answer increasingly intimate questions, by the end of it, some people feel closer to that one person that they answered these questions with than anyone in their lives. And when you're vulnerable with someone, you're saying, 'You're special to me. You're important to me. That's why I'm sharing this information with you.' Of course, there's people that overshare, and it seems like they'll share with anyone and dump on anyone, which is why oversharing doesn't work, because it doesn't convey to a person that they're special to us and that they make us feel particularly safe or we trust them." So in that quote, she teases out both the audience and timing. If in the process of becoming friends, we share our stories with the right people at the appropriate time, it feels like vulnerability. In contrast, Dr. Franco provides some insight about when sharing crosses the line into oversharing. She says, "I differentiate between vulnerability and oversharing because I think the motivation is different. When we're vulnerable, we're discerning. We discern that someone is safe. Something about them makes us feel like we can trust them and we can feel safe with them to be vulnerable. When we overshare, it's actually quite the opposite. It's typically a fear-based compulsion where we are actually afraid they don't like us, and we're trying to pull them in and get them to like us. Or to test them and see if you are going to stick around if you know all these things about me. In that case, it's not actually authentic, because instead of admitting, I'm afraid this person doesn't like me, we're trying to use our vulnerability to protect ourselves from what we're actually feeling and what we're actually sensing. Dr. Franco ends with this question. My question of whether it's oversharing or vulnerability is Is this coming from a place of fear? Two takeaways strike me from Dr. Franco's guidance: discernment and urgency. If I'm feeling urgent about sharing anything, and this includes files, I need to slow down in order not to make a mistake. It's so easy to fall into the panic of, I need to share this now. That was definitely the feeling I had when I shared my divorce story on the date. But aside from real emergency, urgency often pushes us to move too quickly. And that's where we can insert some discernment. Is this really an emergency? Can I take a couple of minutes or breaths and slow it down? Which is a great segue to whether we should share personal stories at work. According to Gallup polling, people with a best friend at work are more likely to recommend their workplace to others, stay with the company, and have higher workplace satisfaction. That data is a compelling argument to company and team leaders to promote and facilitate friendships at work. So should we share our personal stories at work? Discernment and urgency applies here as well. Is it the appropriate audience at the right time? If we're feeling urgent, it might be a good opportunity to step back and reevaluate. But I find it also to be a good reminder to continue to be vulnerable as well. As I mentioned in my story about how I became a parent, I often forget to provide those details as I'm getting to know colleagues and friends. A couple years ago, I was at a pool party with my kids. I was chit-chatting with another parent, and our conversation switched to careers. She mentioned that she's a nurse at the fertility clinic that I used to become pregnant via IVF. What's more, she worked on the team directly with the fertility doctor that helped me. When I revealed that, her eyes grew wide. She looked at me for a long moment. She looked at my 8-year-old daughter. She looked at my 4-year-old son. And then she looked back at me, age 54-year-old me, and her eyes were full. She never met a baby of one of her patients. And even though I wasn't directly one of her patients, it was like seeing the fruit of her labor. Everything is timed to a T in the IVF process. This drug here, that test there, the implantation, then a blood draw on day 10 to see if you're pregnant. And if you are, the due date is an exact calculation from the calendar. The fertility clinic, at least in my case, sees you until you are at 10 weeks along. Then you transfer to an obstetrician, and you may never see them again. My dad was a Presbyterian pastor, and one of his favorite parts was that he felt it was such an honor to be part of the many sacred moments of people's lives. Birth, baptism, marriage, death, to see the whole story. But my acquaintance, the nurse, usually only gets to see that one part of the story. I remember sending a birth announcement to the fertility clinic when I had my babies. But I gathered from her wet and twinkling eyes that's not the same as seeing these kids do a cannonball at a pool party. There are a lot of times we never see the impact of our lives. The way we touch other people with a smile, a question, or a reply. So I love the stories of the full circle moments when we do get to see the fruits of our labor, even if those fruits just got you wet at a pool party. It's all the better to hide the tears. So I'll end this episode with a quote from Dr. Franco. I think vulnerability is just so important for our ability to connect with one another, but also for our mental health in general. So that's the prescription for sharing our personal stories, reminding us to continue to be vulnerable, sharing them with the appropriate audience at the right time to create those strong human connections. Join us next week as we talk with corporate communications professional Brian Hannon about how to share professional communications. Thank you for listening. Our music is composed by the incredibly talented duo of Jack Anthora and Rob Koenig. For more great how to share inspiration, please visit our site at avidiva.com.